The entire throne room went silent. 300 nobles, 12 generals, the high priestess of the Vashti Empire, standing with her ceremonial staff raised, and one human, dirt still on his boots, blood still dried on his collar from the battle 3 days ago, standing in front of the most powerful alien king in the galaxy. King Draven Voss had just offered his only daughter's hand in marriage to a human, a species his people had called insects for over 200 years. Every eye in that room expected one answer. They did not get it. What this soldier said next didn't just shock the royal court. It rewrote the future of two civilizations. 3 days earlier, Sergeant Ethan Marsh wasn't thinking about kings or princesses. He was thinking about survival. The KRYLL swarm had broken through the outer defense grid of Velmora Prime, the Vashti homeworld. 12,000 alien soldiers stood between the swarm and the capital city. Ethan's unit, 4 humans, embedded as liaison specialists under a fragile peace treaty, stood with them. Nobody expected the humans to fight. They were there as a formality, a political gesture, proof that Earth was cooperating with the Vashti Empire after decades of cold, wary distance. But when the swarm broke through the eastern flank, when 300 Vashti soldiers were pinned beneath collapsing shield towers, it was Ethan who went in. Not because he was ordered to, because he couldn't watch people die when he still had ammunition left. He pulled 14 Vashti soldiers out of that collapse. He held the eastern breach alone for 11 minutes until reinforcements arrived. When the smoke cleared, he had a shattered collarbone, a concussion, and the undivided attention of King Draven Voss, who had watched the entire thing from the command tower, and who had lost his own son in the war against the KRYLL 2 years before. The king did not forget what he saw. The summons came 4 days later. Ethan assumed it was a formal thank you, maybe a medal. Humans didn't get invited to the Vashti royal palace, not the inner chambers, not the throne room. In 200 years of contact, no human had ever stood where Ethan was about to stand. The palace itself was unlike anything he'd trained for. Bioluminescent walls that pulsed faintly with the building's own strange nervous system. Guards 9 feet tall, armored in something that looked grown rather than forged. And silence. A deep, ceremonial silence that made every footstep sound like an intrusion. He was led to the throne room, where King Draven Voss sat above him on a dais carved from black volcanic stone. Beside the king stood a young woman. Pale blue skin, eyes like liquid gold, a crown of interwoven metal threaded through silver-white hair. Princess Lyra Voss. Ethan had heard her name before. Everyone had. She was the reason the KRYLL war had escalated in the first place. The KRYLL wanted the resource-rich moon her mother's bloodline governed, and they'd been trying to break the Vashti defense grid to get to it for 3 years. What Ethan did not expect was the king's next words. "Sergeant Marsh," the king said, his translated voice deep and resonant through the chamber. "You saved 300 of my people with no obligation to do so. You bled for a world that is not your own. My people call this the debt of blood. It is the highest honor we can offer, and it can only be repaid one way." The king rose from his throne. "I offer you my daughter's hand in marriage. She will rule beside you. Your species and mine will be bound not by treaty, but by blood, for the first time in our history." 300 nobles held their breath. The high priestess raised her staff, ready to begin the ceremonial binding the moment Ethan gave the expected answer. The only answer anyone in that room believed possible. Because refusing a king's offer of blood debt was not just an insult. It was, by Vashti law, a declaration of war. Ethan looked at the king, then at Lyra, who stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable. Her golden eyes fixed on him with something that wasn't quite hope and wasn't quite fear. He understood, in that moment, exactly what was happening. This wasn't really about him. It was about ending a war that had cost both species thousands of lives. It was about a king who had lost a son and was terrified of losing a daughter too. And it was about a princess who had never once, in her entire life, been asked what she wanted. Ethan bowed, not the shallow diplomatic bow humans were taught, but the deep, full bow reserved for Vashti equals. "Your Majesty," he said, "I am honored beyond anything I have words for. But I won't accept a debt paid with your daughter's future. Gasps rippled through the chamber. A general's hand moved toward his weapon. Ethan continued, steady, unshaken. If your daughter chooses me, freely on her own terms with no debt and no obligation, then I would spend the rest of my life honored to stand beside her. But I won't take a wife as payment. Not for saving lives. Not for anything. He turned to Lyra directly for the first time. So I'm not answering your father. I'm asking you, not as a debt, as a question. Do you want this? The silence that followed was unlike any silence that room had ever held. King Draven Voss, who had prepared for gratitude or refusal or fear, had prepared for everything except a human who refused to let a war be settled with his daughter's freedom, sat back down slowly. And Princess Lyra Voss, for the first time in her life, smiled without ceremony, without politics, without anyone telling her how to feel. Yes, she said, I do. The treaty that followed wasn't built on obligation. It was built on the first real trust between humans and the Vashti Empire in 200 years, because one soldier had refused to let gratitude become a chain, and one princess had finally been given the one thing her title had never allowed her, a choice. The KRYLL war ended 8 months later. Historians would later call it the fastest peace resolution in galactic record, and they'd point to one moment as the turning point. Not a battle, not a treaty signing, but a single sentence spoken in a throne room by a human who understood something the Vashti nobility had forgotten. That the strongest bonds were never the ones forced by debt. They were the ones freely chosen. If you want to see how Ethan and Lyra's story continues, the wedding the entire empire tried to stop, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter.